Mr. President, why did you decide that now is finally the right time to visit the southern border? Republicans have been calling on you to do this since the beginning.
Because Republicans haven't been serious about this at all. Come on. They haven't been serious about this at all.
Wow, that was President Biden this week attacking Republicans for not being serious about the border while once again failing to acknowledge his dereliction of duty at the southern border, where these last 2 years in office, during which time 5 million plus have entered the country illegally, an additional 1 million have evaded apprehension and have gotten away, that we know of anyway, 1 million, and a total of about 30,000 pounds of fentanyl seized in just 2 years that Biden has been in office. Joe Biden will finally visit El Paso later today to meet with local officials. Then he'll travel to Mexico City to attend the North American Leaders Summit with the leaders of Mexico and Canada. It is here in Mexico that drug lords are controlling the U.S.'s southern border, deciding who gets into America and who doesn't, and at what price, generating billions of dollars in profit from this human and drug smuggling operation. Joining me right now from the front lines of the country, Texas, the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, is here. Governor, good morning to you. Thanks very much for being here.
Happy New Year, thanks.
And Happy New Year to you. Joe Biden decided to go to the border. He's going later today. We will cover it live about 2, 3 p.m. Eastern. Did he call you? Are you meeting with him?
So listen, during this entire time, Joe Biden has not called me. He did not call me, nor his staff called and let us know either about his visit or to invite us until last night. We got a random email to one of my staff members asking if I would be there to meet him on the tarmac. And so they have failed to communicate. And listen, this visit is about 2 years too late and about $20 billion short of what needs to be done. All he's going to do down there is rearrange the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. He's not going to achieve any solutions that will make the border safer, more secure, and stop illegal immigration.
Governor, no doubt you have seen this quote-unquote fact sheet from the White House, and it says that the Biden-Harris administration announces new border enforcement actions. They are creating resources, they say, to the border and to the region, and they're going to come up with a new parole for illegals coming in. What are your thoughts on this fact sheet from the White House on Biden's plans for the border?
So Biden's plan is not border enforcement, it is border crossing enticement. That will do nothing more than entice even more people to be coming across our border. There are things under current law that Biden can and must do. One is he shall detain and stop the release of people crossing the border illegally. Second, he should be prosecuting those who cross the border illegally, which he is currently authorized to do. Third, he needs to aggressively reinforce the Remain in Mexico as well as the Title 42 policies that federal courts have required him to do. And then the fourth thing he needs to do is to build a border wall. Those are all things he could clearly do if his goal really was to stop illegal immigration. But that's not his goal.
Well, I mean, it's extraordinary to me that he would sit there and allow these dangerous drug cartels to be making the decision of who comes in and who doesn't and at what price. You have been trying to stop that. You're the only one who has really done something significant in terms of trying to secure our borders and this great country. And you're in the process right now of continuing to put up these containers at your border. But the Biden administration told Arizona to take them down, and that's what they're doing. So how are you getting away with putting them up?
Yeah, well, I'll explain that to you. But first, let me explain to you, people saw these massive crossings into El Paso. And when I saw them, I ordered the National Guard to go down there and stop those illegal crossings. And they immediately built these razor wire barriers, as well as other barriers, as well as putting down those container boxes. And suddenly, the inflow of people coming across the border into El Paso stopped. And the reason and the way that we have the authority to do this, different than Arizona, is I've declared our authority to stop this illegal immigration under Article 1, Section 10. And so we are just taking over the property in that region and doing everything we can using our National Guard, our Texas Department of Public Safety to put a stop to illegal crossings wherever we can.
Have you heard from the administration? Have they tried to get you to stop putting up barriers there?
We haven't heard anything from them. It's like Texas leadership does not exist to the Biden administration, which is one of the problems. Again, we have very simple solutions the Biden administration could apply to do something about this if they wanted to, but they really don't care about stopping illegal immigration. Biden is there today to look at a sanitized El Paso so that he can do all he can to help and aid the illegal immigrants as opposed to stopping them from coming into our country.
Well, I think you make a really important point, and that is the El Paso officials have started to clean things up. They're taking the homelessness out of sight. Obviously, the media will be following Joe Biden around when he goes to El Paso, and this administration probably doesn't want them to see what has been the reality for the citizens of El Paso. Why did they clean it up rather than being transparent about what's really taking place there?
Well, I think you kind of hit the point, and that is the Biden administration does not want America to see the chaos that the Biden administration's policies have imposed. What Biden really needs to do, he needs to talk to the thousands of Texans who live on the border whose lives have been destroyed by Joe Biden's policies. But he's not going to talk to anybody like that. He's going to get a candy-coated version of what's going on down there and not know the information that he really needs to understand so that he can fix this. One last thing about this, Maria, and that is, as you know, the polling numbers for Biden on the border issue across the country are horrible. And it's because he's not stepping up and doing what he needs to do. He and the Democrats, they're going to suffer mightily at the ballot box when Joe Biden is up for re-election because he's not fulfilling his job as commander-in-chief to secure our border.
What more can you do as governor of Texas? We're going to show some of the elements of your Operation Lone Star, which has been very effective, but people want to know more. And they want more from you as the governor of Texas, as this is our most porous spot in the country.
Sure. So let me list several things that we are doing and we are expanding. Number one, you mentioned fentanyl. We've seized enough fentanyl that would be enough to kill every American in the United States, and our efforts continue in that regard through the Texas Department of Public Safety. Second, we have thousands of National Guard deployed to the border whose primary purpose is to repel or to turn back people who are trying to cross illegally, or if they do make it, we set up these barriers or barricades to prevent them from getting into places like El Paso, like what you have seen. The third is that we continue to build the border wall. The very same border wall that you saw President Trump put up, we are constructing more of that wall as we speak right now. And we're on a pathway where it's possible at the end of this year, Texas as a state will have constructed more border wall than President Trump was able to construct during his time as president in the state of Texas.
Governor, what kind of a cost are we talking about in terms of housing these illegal migrants? They're getting lots of perks in terms of a cell phone, in terms of housing, as well as food stamps. What does that mean in terms of the bottom line to Texas when you consider these additional costs?
I think the best way to assess that is to look at what Mayor Adams of New York has said. He's saying that 30,000 migrants that they are having to house in New York is costing them $1 billion. If it's costing them $1 billion, Texas is suffering $10 or $25 billion in costs. And so the costs are extraordinary on top of the $4 billion we spent over the past 2 years to secure the border. And we're about to head into a legislative session where we will add another $4 billion for Texas to do our part to do the federal government's job of securing the border.
I want to get your take on these documents that the January 6th committee has released, sharing the Social Security numbers of your Social Security number. What kind of data was released, personal data of yours, from the January 6th committee, and why?
Well, first of all, Maria, the release of this information is shocking. This is a committee of the United States Congress. They supposedly care about their fellow Americans, but yet they dangerously and recklessly released very sensitive personal information about people who visited the White House. And I think that this should be a crime. We're looking into holding anybody accountable who was responsible for the release of this information. You ask what information was released? That's a great question. I have lawyers who are working to get to the bottom of what was released, who released it, and what legal consequences can apply to hold accountable anybody who recklessly released this information.
Well, this is just extraordinary. You have an administration that is telling social media what to report, what to suppress, amplifying lies, suppressing truth, while at the same time, the January 6th committee exposes nearly 2,000 Social Security numbers of Republicans, GOP governors, and their families. What kind of an impact is that going to have on your family?
Well, it's a huge impact because, as I understand, it may be the information not only of myself, but also my wife. And so our information is exposed for criminals to use, for us to be exploited, for us to sustain, extraordinary damages. And the people who need to suffer the damages are the people who recklessly release this information. And we will get to the bottom of it and hold accountable anybody on this committee who had anything to do with releasing that information that they had no right to release.
Incredible. Governor, it's great to talk with you this morning. Thanks very much for your leadership, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Maria.
All right, Governor Greg Abbott in Texas.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.